She was shutting the motel reception until the billionaire heard his wife's voice on her tape recorder and he froze. The crystal wine glass shattered against the marble kitchen wall, red liquid bleeding down like tears from an open wound. Isabelle Ellery stood frozen, her chest heaving, mascara smudged beneath eyes that had once sparkled with love, but now burned with 15 years of accumulated resentment. "You don't even see me anymore, Thomas," she whispered, her voice cracking like autumn leaves. "I'm standing right here, and you look right through me like I'm already gone." Thomas ran his hands through his graying hair, the gesture she'd once found endearing now seeming dismissive and cold. At 45, he still carried himself with the confidence that had built his hotel empire. But tonight, that confidence felt like armor against her pain. "That's not fair, Isabelle. I've been trying. Her laugh was bitter, hollow. "You've been trying to fix me like I'm one of your broken-down properties. Well, congratulations, Thomas. Some things can't be renovated." The rain hammered against their floor-to-ceiling windows. Nature's percussion section accompanying this final act of their marriage, their penthouse apartment, once a sanctuary of shared dreams, now felt like a beautiful prison where two strangers happened to share the same address. "I can't do this anymore," Isabelle continued, her voice steadying with newfound resolve. "I want a divorce." The words hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished candle. Thomas felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, as if his heart had just changed rhythm entirely. "Izzy, please. We can work through this. We always have." "No." She shook her head, dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. "We used to work through things. Now we just exist, side by side, like two people waiting for different buses at the same stop." She turned away from him, staring out at the city lights blurred by rain. "I'm suffocating, Thomas. Every morning I wake up in that bed, and I feel like I'm drowning in what we used to be. I can't breathe in this life anymore." The mention of their bed sent a sharp pain through Thomas's chest. 2 years ago, that bed had been where they'd held each other after losing the baby at 20 weeks, where they'd whispered promises about trying again, about healing together. Instead, the loss had carved out something essential between them, leaving them like two people speaking different languages. "Where will you go?" The question escaped him before he could stop it. "I don't know. Maybe my sister's place in Portland. Maybe somewhere completely new." She finally turned back to face him, and he was struck by how young she looked despite everything. "I just know I can't stay here and keep pretending we're still the people who fell in love all those years ago." Thomas wanted to argue, to fight for them, but the words wouldn't come. Deep down, he knew she was right. They'd been performing their marriage for months now, going through the motions like actors who'd forgotten their original motivation. "I'll have my lawyer contact yours," she said quietly, gathering her purse and car keys. "I'm staying at the Marriott downtown tonight. I need some space to think." After she left, Thomas stood in their kitchen for what felt like hours, staring at the broken glass and wine stain on the wall. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows, and he felt like he was trapped inside a snow globe that someone kept shaking. He couldn't stay here. Not tonight. Not surrounded by the ghost of their happiness. Grabbing his keys and jacket, Thomas headed for the garage. His black BMW started with a purr, and he backed out into the storm without any clear destination. He just drove, letting muscle memory and instinct guide him through the empty streets. The city gave way to suburbs to rural roads, and still he drove. The rain made everything look like an impressionist painting, all blurred edges and melting colors. He thought about Isabelle, about the woman she'd been when they first met at that charity gala 14 years ago. She'd been radiant then, full of laughter and dreams about designing sustainable homes for low-income families. Somewhere along the way, life had dimmed that light, and he'd been too busy building his empire to notice until it was almost completely extinguished. His phone buzzed with a text. Probably Isabelle, but he didn't check it. He kept driving until he saw the neon sign flickering through the rain. Harbor Lights Motel. Vacancy. The place looked like something from a different era, all peeling paint and weathered siding. It wasn't the kind of establishment Thomas Ellery usually frequented, but tonight he wasn't the hotel magnate. He was just a man whose world had just collapsed. He parked near the office and made a dash through the rain. A bell chimed as he pushed through the glass door. and he found himself in a small lobby that smelled of coffee and something floral, maybe lavender air freshener. Behind the reception desk sat a young woman with auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun, a few strands escaping to frame her face. She looked up from what appeared to be a journal, and Thomas felt something strange happen in his chest. Not attraction exactly, but recognition, like seeing a familiar face in an unexpected place. "Hi there," she said, her voice warm despite the late hour. "Rough night to be out driving." "Yeah, you could say that." Thomas approached the desk, water dripping from his jacket onto the worn carpet. "I need a room for the night. Maybe 2 nights, actually. I'm not sure yet. Of course, we have several available." Her fingers moved across an old-fashioned keyboard. "I'm Claire, by the way. I work the night shift here." "Thomas." He pulled out his wallet, noting how she didn't seem to recognize him. In his world, everyone knew who Thomas Ellery was. Here, he was just another traveler seeking shelter from the storm. As Claire processed his information, Thomas heard something that made his blood run cold. A voice was playing softly from somewhere behind the desk. A recording, he realized. A woman speaking in hushed, intimate tones about loneliness and dreams deferred. The voice was hauntingly familiar, so similar to Isabelle's that for a moment he thought he was losing his mind. But this voice carried something Isabelle's had lost. A vulnerability, a sweetness, a hope that still believed in better days ahead. "Sorry about that," Claire said, quickly reaching to turn off what looked like a small digital recorder. "I was just reviewing some personal notes. I didn't realize the volume was up." "No, it's fine," Thomas managed, though his hands were shaking slightly as he signed the registration form. That was your voice." Claire's cheeks flushed pink. "Yeah. My therapist suggested I try recording my thoughts as a way to process things. It's kind of embarrassing, actually." Thomas stared at her. This woman whose voice could have been his wife's twin, whose presence somehow felt like both déjà vu and discovery. "Room 15, Claire said, handing him an actual key rather than a key card. "It's just down the hall. There's a coffee maker and some complimentary snacks." "Thank you." He took the key, their fingers brushing briefly. "Claire, that recording technique, does it help?" She tilted her head, studying him with eyes that seemed older than her years. "Sometimes it helps me make sense of things when the world feels too complicated, you know." Thomas nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "Good night, Claire." "Good night, Thomas. I hope tomorrow's a better day for you." As he walked down the dimly lit hallway to his room, Thomas felt like he'd just stepped into an alternate universe where everything was familiar, yet completely different. Behind him, he could hear Claire's voice resume its quiet recording, speaking words of resilience and hope into the storm-filled night. He unlocked room 15 and stepped inside, but sleep was the furthest thing from his mind. Thomas lay on the motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling as rain continued its relentless drumming against the window. The mattress was softer than he'd expected, the room cleaner too, but nothing could quiet the chaos in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard that voice again, Claire's voice that sounded so achingly like Isabelle's, yet carried none of the bitterness that had crept into his wife's tone over the past 2 years. At 3:17 a.m., he gave up on sleep and wandered to the window. The parking lot was a mirror of puddles reflecting the motel's neon sign. His BMW looked out of place among the pickup trucks and worn sedans. Like a tuxedo at a barbecue, through the rain-streaked glass, he could see light spilling from the office windows where Claire presumably sat, keeping watch over this small sanctuary for travelers. The next morning brought weak sunlight filtering through gray clouds. Thomas had dozed fitfully for maybe 2 hours total. He showered with the complimentary soap that smelled like industrial pine and dressed in yesterday's clothes, feeling disheveled in a way that had nothing to do with his appearance. When he approached the front desk, Claire was still there, though she looked like she'd been up all night too. Her auburn hair was now completely down, framing a face that was pretty in an understated way, the kind of beauty that snuck up on you rather than demanding immediate attention. "You're up early," she said, glancing at the clock that read 7:23 a.m. "Or maybe you never went to sleep. Is it that obvious?" Thomas managed a rueful smile. "Takes one to know one." She gestured to the coffee maker in the corner. "Fresh pot if you want some. Fair warning, though. It's stronger than most people are used to. Night shift coffee has to be." As Thomas poured himself a cup, Claire asked, "How was the room? Everything working okay?" "Actually, there might be an issue with my car," he said, the lie coming easier than he'd expected. "It was making some weird noises on the drive here last night. Mind if I stay another night while I figure out what's wrong with it?" Claire studied him for a moment, and Thomas wondered if she could see through his deception, but she simply nodded. "Of course, I'll keep you in the same room." "I appreciate it." He took a sip of the coffee and nearly gasped. She wasn't kidding about it being strong. This could wake the dead. "That's the idea." Claire laughed, and the sound was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "You'd be amazed how many people wander in here at 3 a.m. looking for a place to crash. I need all the help I can get staying alert." "Do you work every night?" 6 nights a week. Sundays I try to pretend I'm a normal person who sleeps when it's dark." She pulled a thermos from under the counter and filled it with coffee. "But the pay's decent, and it works with my daughter's school schedule." Thomas felt a pang of something. Surprise? Maybe? Or disappointment? "You have a daughter. Sophie, she's 8. Claire's face lit up in a way that transformed her completely. "She stays with my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, when I work nights. It's not ideal, but we make it work." "That must be tough, being a single mom." Claire's expression shifted slightly, walls going up with practiced ease. "We manage just fine." Thomas realized he'd stepped into sensitive territory. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to pry." "It's okay." She softened again. "Sophie's amazing. She's the reason I do everything I do. The reason I started those recordings you heard last night. Actually, my therapist said it might help me process some things so I can be a better mom for her." The mention of the recordings made Thomas's pulse quicken. "What kind of things do you talk about in them?" Claire hesitated, clearly debating how much to share with this stranger. "Just life stuff. Growing up without parents, trusting people, figuring out how to break cycles you didn't even know you were trapped in." She shrugged. "Probably sounds pretty boring to most people." "Not boring at all," Thomas said quietly. "Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones we have with ourselves." Something in his tone made Claire look at him more carefully. "You sound like you speak from experience." "Maybe I do." Thomas found himself wanting to tell her everything. About Isabelle. About the baby they'd lost. About how success in business seemed to mean failure in everything that actually mattered. Instead, he asked, "How long have you been working here?" "About 6 months since my divorce was finalized." The words came out matter-of-factly, but Thomas caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "Before that, I was trying to make it work as a freelance graphic designer, but it wasn't enough to support Sophie and me. This job isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and gives me time during the day to be with her." "What happened with your marriage?" "If you don't mind me asking." Claire was quiet for so long that Thomas thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "He said I wasn't the woman he married anymore, that I'd become too serious, too focused on survival instead of living." She let out a bitter laugh. "Funny thing is, he was probably right. When you spend years walking on eggshells, trying to keep someone happy who's determined to be miserable, you do lose pieces of yourself." The parallel to his own situation hit Thomas like a physical blow. "I'm sorry. Don't be. We're better off without him." Claire straightened, clearly wanting to change the subject. "What about you? What brings a guy in an expensive suit to a place like this? Besides mysterious car troubles, I mean." Thomas felt heat creep up his neck, so she had noticed his clothes. Had probably clocked the BMW too. "Sometimes you need to get away from your regular life for a while. Think about things differently." "Ah, the old geographic cure. I get it." Claire's smile was knowing but not unkind. "Though usually people running away from their lives don't pick places quite so close to home. You're local, right? I can tell by your accent." "About an hour north of here." Thomas was impressed by her perceptiveness. "You're very observant. Occupational hazard. You meet all kinds working nights at a motel. You learn to read people pretty quickly." She paused, studying his face. "You've got that look." "What look?" "Like someone just told you everything you believed about your life was wrong." Her voice was gentle, understanding. "I recognize it because I wore it for about 6 months after my husband left." Thomas felt exposed, like she could see straight through all his carefully constructed defenses. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been there," Claire leaned against the counter, and Thomas caught a faint scent of lavender, the same smell he'd noticed in the lobby last night. Want some unsolicited advice from someone who's learned a few things about starting over? Please. The hardest part isn't letting go of what you had. It's figuring out who you are when you're not being who you thought you were supposed to be. She picked up her thermos and headed toward the door. I'm going to do a quick walk around the property. Check that the storm didn't cause any damage. Help yourself to more coffee if you want it. As she reached the door, she turned back. Thomas, whatever you're running from, it'll still be there when you go back. But sometimes a little distance helps you see it more clearly. After she left, Thomas stood alone in the small lobby, surrounded by the lingering scent of lavender and the echo of wisdom that seemed far too mature for someone so young. He thought about her words, about the way she'd looked at him with understanding rather than judgment. Outside, he could see Claire walking the perimeter of the property, her hair catching the weak morning light. She moved with quiet confidence, checking door frames and examining the roofline with the practiced eye of someone who took pride in her work. No matter how humble, for the first time in months, Thomas felt something other than numbness or despair. It was curiosity, maybe, or hope. This woman whose voice haunted him, whose story seemed to mirror his own pain while pointing toward something brighter. She was real, not just a projection of his troubled marriage. He poured himself another cup of the impossibly strong coffee and settled into one of the lobby chairs to wait for her return. He had nowhere else he needed to be, and for the first time in years, that felt like a gift rather than a problem. 3 days passed in a strange rhythm that Thomas had never experienced before. His mornings began with Claire's impossibly strong coffee and conversations that meandered from philosophy to parenting, to the small observations that make up a life lived quietly. His afternoons were spent walking the nearby coastal trails, thinking about everything and nothing, while his evenings found him back in the motel lobby, drawn by the sound of Claire's voice as she recorded her nightly reflections. She'd grown comfortable enough with his presence that she no longer turned off the recorder when he appeared. Instead, she'd pause her thoughts and chat with him about her day. Sophie's latest adventure at school, a difficult customer who'd demanded a refund because the room smelled too clean, her dreams of maybe going back to school someday. Thomas found himself lying about increasingly elaborate car troubles. First, it was a strange noise, then a part that needed to be ordered, then complications with his insurance. Claire accepted each excuse with what seemed like genuine concern, though he sometimes caught her watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. On the 4th morning, everything changed. Thomas was sitting in his usual spot in the lobby, reading a newspaper someone had left behind, when Claire emerged from the office looking different. Her face was pale, her hands slightly shaky as she approached him. "Thomas," she said, her voice carefully controlled, "I need to ask you something." He folded the newspaper, noting the tension in her posture. "Of course, what's on your mind?" Instead of answering, she walked to his BMW and pointed at the passenger seat. Through the window, Thomas could see it, the latest issue of Business Weekly, folded open to an article about hotel industry acquisitions. His own photograph stared back at them, accompanied by the headline, "Thomas Ellery's Empire Expands. Luxury Chain Acquires 3 Historic Properties." The blood drained from Thomas's face. He'd completely forgotten about leaving the magazine there after reading it during a coffee run yesterday. "So," Claire said, her voice steady, but her eyes flashing with hurt and anger. "Thomas Ellery, not just Thomas with mysterious car troubles. Claire, I can explain. Can you?" She crossed her arms, and Thomas realized how small she looked standing there in her worn jeans and Harbor Lights motel polo shirt, facing down a man whose net worth probably exceeded her lifetime earnings. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a very wealthy, very married man has been lying to me for 4 days about why he's slumming it at my motel. The word married hit him like a slap. She'd noticed his wedding ring. Of course she had. He'd been an idiot to think she wouldn't. "You're right," Thomas said quietly. "I have been lying. Not about everything, but about enough. Try me." Claire's voice was ice cold now. All warmth evaporated. "Tell me the truth, Mr. Ellery. What's a hotel magnate doing pretending to have car trouble at the Harbor Lights motel? Research for a hostile takeover? Slumming for kicks? Or maybe you just get off on lying to working-class single mothers?" Each word stung, because Thomas could hear the hurt beneath the anger. He'd earned her trust over the past few days, and now he was watching it crumble in real time. "My wife asked for a divorce 4 nights ago," he said finally. "I drove out here because I couldn't stand being in our apartment, surrounded by everything we used to be. I heard you recording that first night, and your voice. It reminded me of something I thought I'd lost forever." Claire's expression didn't soften. "So, you decided to what? Use me as therapy? Study me like some kind of specimen?" "No, it wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" Claire's voice rose, and Thomas was grateful the parking lot was empty. "Because from my perspective, a rich married man spent 4 days lying to me, listening to my most private thoughts, learning about my daughter, my divorce, my struggles, and I'm supposed to believe that was all innocent." Thomas ran his hands through his hair. The gesture that Isabelle always said made him look like a guilty schoolboy. "You're absolutely right to be angry. I should have been honest from the beginning. Why weren't you?" The simple question hung between them like a challenge. Thomas could give her a dozen reasons. His need for anonymity, his fear that she'd treat him differently if she knew who he was, his desire to escape his identity for a while, but none of those felt like the whole truth. "Because when I'm with you, I feel like myself again," he said finally. "Not Thomas Ellery, the hotel magnate, or Thomas the failed husband. Just me. I haven't felt that way in years." Claire stared at him for a long moment, and Thomas could see the war between hurt and understanding playing out across her features. "That's a beautiful sentiment," she said finally. "But it doesn't change the fact that you've been lying to me while I've been completely honest with you. You know about my daughter, my ex-husband, my struggles to make ends meet. You know about my therapy, my fears, my dreams. What do I know about you? That you're rich, married, and apparently skilled at deception." The accusation hit home because it was completely fair. Thomas realized that despite their hours of conversation, he'd revealed almost nothing substantial about himself while learning everything about her. "You're right," he admitted. "I've been selfish, taking from you without giving anything real back. So give me something real now." Claire's voice was still angry, but Thomas heard something else underneath, maybe hope that this could still be salvaged. "Tell me about your wife. Tell me about your life. Tell me why a man who has everything would run away to a roadside motel." Thomas looked at her standing there in the weak morning sunlight. This woman who'd shown him more genuine kindness in 4 days than he'd experienced in months, and made a decision. "Her name is Isabelle. We've been married for 15 years, and I thought we were happy until we lost a baby 2 years ago. Since then, we've been like strangers living in the same house. She's angry all the time, and I don't know how to help her. So I work more to avoid the fighting. 4 nights ago, she told me she was suffocating in our marriage and wanted a divorce." Claire's expression softened slightly. "I'm sorry, losing a child. I can't imagine. The night I came here, I'd been driving for hours in the rain, just trying to escape the sound of my life falling apart. When I heard you recording, your voice was so much like hers, but it carried something hers had lost. Hope. I guess resilience? You'd been through hell too, but you hadn't let it make you bitter. So you wanted to study me, figure out what she was missing." Thomas shook his head. "Maybe at first, but then I got to know you, and it wasn't about her anymore. It was about you, about how you make Sophie laugh when you tell her stories over the phone, about how you actually care, whether the guests here feel welcome, about how you're brave enough to record your thoughts and face your demons instead of running from them." Claire was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was calmer, but still guarded. "I need you to understand something, Thomas. I've been down this road before. Men who think they can fix their marriages by playing house with someone else. It never ends well for women like me. This isn't about fixing my marriage," Thomas said, though even as he said it, he wasn't entirely sure it was true. "Isn't it?" Claire challenged. "Because it sounds like you've been using me as a mirror to see what your wife used to be. And when you go back to your real life, which we both know you will, where does that leave me?" Thomas didn't have an answer for that, and his silence spoke volumes. Claire nodded, as if he'd confirmed something she'd suspected all along. "I think you should check out, Thomas, today." "Claire, please. I'm not angry anymore," she said, and Thomas could hear the sadness in her voice. "I'm just tired of being the kind of woman men use to figure out what they want from other women. I deserve better than that. Sophie deserves better than that. She turned and walked back toward the office, leaving Thomas standing alone in the parking lot with the weight of his deception and the ruins of something that might have been genuine connection. As he watched her disappear behind the glass doors, Thomas realized that in trying to hold on to something beautiful, he'd destroyed it completely. And for the first time since this whole mess began, he understood exactly how Isabelle must have felt when she said she was suffocating. Thomas didn't check out that day. Instead, he sat in his BMW for 3 hours, staring at the motel office through rain-spotted windows, trying to summon the courage to either drive away or go back inside and make things right. Every time he reached for the ignition, he heard Claire's voice in his head, not the bitter words from their confrontation, but the gentle wisdom from their late-night conversations, the laughter when she told him about Sophie's latest school project, the quiet strength in her recordings. Finally, as the afternoon shadows grew long, he returned to room 15. He would stay one more night, he told himself, give Claire time to cool down, then try to explain himself properly in the morning. But morning came, and Claire wasn't at the front desk. A tired-looking man in his 60s had taken over, introducing himself as George, the day manager. When Thomas asked about Claire, George simply said she'd switched to a different shift schedule. Personal reasons, George explained, with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd learned not to pry into his employees' lives. Thomas extended his stay anyway, telling George the same lies about car trouble that had worked so well on Claire. But now the lies felt heavier, more pathetic. He was a 45-year-old man hiding out in a roadside motel, chasing after a woman who'd rightfully called him out on his deception. 3 days passed without seeing Claire. Thomas fell into a strange routine of walking the coastal trails during the day, reading in coffee shops, and returning to the motel each evening hoping to catch a glimpse of her. He learned from casual conversation with George that Claire worked the evening shift now, 3 p.m. to 11 p.m., which meant she was gone by the time Thomas returned from his aimless wanderings. On the 4th day, his patience broke. He parked across the street from Sophie's elementary school at dismissal time, telling himself he just wanted to see if Claire was picking up her daughter. The guilt he felt sitting there in his expensive car, watching for a woman who'd made it clear she wanted nothing to do with him, was almost overwhelming. But when he saw Claire emerge from a beat-up Honda Civic, her face lighting up as 8-year-old Sophie ran toward her, Thomas felt something crack open in his chest. The little girl was all energy and motion, backpack bouncing as she chattered excitedly about her day. Claire knelt down to Sophie's eye level, giving her daughter her complete attention in a way that reminded Thomas painfully of how Isabelle used to listen to him when they first met. He drove away before they could notice him, hating himself for the invasion of their privacy. That evening, Thomas finally did what he should have done days earlier. He called Isabelle Thomas. Her voice was surprised, maybe even concerned. "Where are you?" "Your assistant said you canceled all your meetings for the week. I'm staying at a motel about an hour south," he said, sitting on the edge of his narrow bed. "I needed some time to think. About us. About everything." Thomas stared at the water stain on the ceiling that had become as familiar as the lines on his palm. "Izzy, do you remember what you were like before we lost the baby?" The silence stretched so long that Thomas wondered if she'd hung up. "What kind of question is that?" she finally asked. "I met someone recently who reminded me of you. Not the you that you are now, but the you that you used to be. It made me realize how much we've both changed, and not in good ways." "You met someone?" Isabelle's voice went cold. "Thomas, are you having an affair?" "No," Thomas said quickly, then paused. "At least, not in the way you mean. But I have been thinking about someone other than you, and that's not fair to either of us." Another long silence when Isabelle spoke again. Her voice was small, vulnerable in a way he hadn't heard in months. "I think about the baby every day," she whispered. "I think about what kind of mother I would have been, what our lives would have looked like, and when I look at you, I see all the children we'll never have, all the conversations we'll never have with them, all the soccer games and school plays and first dates we'll never experience. Sometimes I can barely breathe from the weight of all that missing." Thomas felt tears burning his eyes. "Why didn't you tell me that before?" "Because you seemed so eager to move on, to get back to normal, and I couldn't figure out how to tell you that our normal was gone forever." "I wasn't eager to move on," Thomas said. "I was terrified, I didn't know how to help you, so I threw myself into work. I thought if I could just keep everything else stable, eventually we'd find our way back to each other. But we didn't, did we? No, we didn't. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, and Thomas realized this was the most honest conversation they'd had since the night everything fell apart. Who is she? Isabelle asked finally. The woman who reminded you of me. Thomas chose his words carefully. Her name is Claire. She works nights at the motel where I'm staying. She's a single mother, divorced, trying to build a life for herself and her daughter. She records these audio journals as therapy, and her voice, it sounds exactly like yours, but it carries this hope that I haven't heard from you in a long time. Hope for what? That tomorrow might be better than today. That pain doesn't have to define you forever. That it's possible to start over and build something beautiful from broken pieces. Isabelle was quiet again, and Thomas could almost hear her thinking. I've been seeing Dr. Martinez again, she said finally. The grief counselor from the hospital. I should have started months ago, but I was too proud to admit I couldn't handle this on my own. That's good, Izzy. That's really good. She says grief changes people permanently, but it doesn't have to destroy them. She says I need to figure out who I am now, not try to go back to who I was before. Thomas thought about Claire's words about starting over, about learning who you are when you're not being who you thought you were supposed to be. Maybe that's what we both need to do, he said. Maybe. Isabelle paused. Thomas, I still want the divorce. I know that's not what you want to hear, but I need to figure out who I am on my own before I can be part of an us again. The words stung, but Thomas recognized the truth in them. I understand, but maybe we could try being friends first. Real friends, not just people who used to be married. Maybe we could have dinner sometime and talk about books or politics or anything except what we used to be. It wasn't what Thomas had hoped for, but it was more than he'd dared to expect. I'd like that. After they hung up, Thomas sat in the gathering darkness, feeling something like peace for the first time in weeks. Talking to Isabelle hadn't fixed everything, but it had reminded him that love didn't always look like holding on. Sometimes it looked like letting go gracefully. But even as he found closure with his wife, thoughts of Claire continued to circle through his mind, not as a replacement for Isabelle, or an escape from his problems, but as herself, a woman whose strength and wisdom had touched something in him that he thought was permanently broken. The next morning, Thomas made a decision. He would check out of the Harbor Lights Motel and return to his real life. But first, he would leave something for Claire. Not an apology exactly, because words seemed inadequate, but an acknowledgement of what she'd given him without even knowing it. He spent the morning walking the beach, collecting smooth stones and thinking about second chances, about the difference between running away and moving forward, about how sometimes the most important conversations really were the ones you had with yourself. By afternoon, he had a plan. Thomas had planned to leave quietly. He'd written a letter to Claire, not an apology exactly, but an acknowledgement of how much their conversations had meant to him, and how sorry he was for the deception. He'd intended to leave it with George, settle his bill, and drive back to his real life with whatever dignity he had left. But as he loaded his suitcase into the BMW that Tuesday morning, a silver Mercedes pulled into the motel parking lot with the aggressive precision of someone on a mission. Thomas recognized the car immediately. It was Isabelle's, though he'd never seen her drive it with such obvious fury. She parked directly in front of the motel office, her door slamming shut with enough force to rattle the windows. Thomas watched from behind his car as his estranged wife marched toward the entrance, her black hair whipping around her face, designer heels clicking against the asphalt like gunshots. Everything about her body language screamed confrontation. Thomas's stomach dropped as he realized what must have happened. Somehow, Isabelle had discovered his location. Worse, she'd probably figured out about Claire, the private investigator. Of course, she'd hired one. He'd been so focused on his own emotional turmoil that he'd never considered Isabelle might be having him followed. He rushed toward the office, but he was too late. Through the glass doors, he could see Isabelle facing off with Claire across the reception desk, and even from outside, the tension was palpable. Thomas pushed through the door just in time to hear Isabelle's voice, sharp as broken glass. "So you're the woman who's been playing house with my husband." Claire stood behind the counter, her face pale but her posture straight. She was in her work uniform, khaki pants and the Harbor Lights polo, and next to Isabelle's tailored black dress and perfect makeup, she looked young and vulnerable. But her voice was steady when she replied, "I think you have the wrong idea about what's been happening here." "Do I?" Isabelle laughed. But there was no humor in it. "Because according to my investigator, my husband has been staying here for 2 weeks, lying about car trouble, and spending hours talking to a night clerk who happens to sound exactly like..." Isabelle stopped mid-sentence, her face going white. Thomas realized she was hearing Claire's voice for the first time, really hearing it, and the effect was exactly what he'd experienced that first night. The recognition was so complete, so startling, that it seemed to knock the wind out of her. "Jesus," Isabelle whispered, staring at Claire with a mixture of shock and something else, maybe fear. "You do sound exactly like me." Claire frowned, glancing between Thomas and Isabelle with growing confusion. "I'm sorry." "What?" "Your voice," Isabelle said, stepping closer to the counter. How is that possible?" Thomas stepped forward, his heart hammering. "Isabelle, please, this isn't what you think, isn't it?" Isabelle whirled on him, but her anger seemed to have transformed into something more complex. "You've been hiding out here for 2 weeks, Thomas. 2 weeks of lies while I've been going crazy, wondering where you were, what you were thinking, whether you were coming back. I told you I needed time to think. You told me you were staying at a motel. You didn't tell me you were having some kind of psychological breakdown involving a woman who sounds like your wife." Isabelle's voice cracked on the last words. Claire looked between them, understanding dawning on her face. "Oh my God, that's why you stayed. It wasn't about getting to know me at all. It was because I sound like her. Claire, that's not... It started that way, but it became something else." "No." Claire's voice was quiet but firm. "No, it didn't. You told me yourself that first night. You said my voice reminded you of something you thought you'd lost forever. I was just too stupid to understand what you meant." The three of them stood in the small lobby, forming a triangle of hurt and misunderstanding. Thomas felt like he was watching his life implode in slow motion. Isabelle was staring at Claire with an intensity that made everyone uncomfortable. "It's not just the voice," she said slowly. "You look like me too, younger. But the bone structure, the way you carry yourself, how is that possible?" "Lady, I don't know what you're talking about," Claire said, but Thomas could hear the unease in her voice. "I've never seen you before in my life, but that's impossible." Isabelle pulled out her phone, scrolling through photos. "Look at this." She turned the screen toward Claire, showing a picture of herself from several years ago, before the miscarriage. When she still smiled easily, Claire glanced at the photo and froze. The resemblance was unmistakable. Not identical, but close enough to be sisters, maybe even twins. "What the hell is going on here?" Claire whispered, before anyone could answer. The office door chimed again, and George walked in carrying a box of office supplies. He took one look at the tense scene and set the box down carefully. "Everything okay out here?" he asked, his eyes moving between the three of them. "George," Claire said, her voice strained. "Do you see any resemblance between me and this woman?" George looked from Claire to Isabelle and back again, his eyebrows rising. "Well, I'll be damned. You two could be sisters. That's some crazy coincidence." "It's not a coincidence," Isabelle said, her voice gaining strength. "Coincidences like this don't happen. There has to be a connection." Claire shook her head. "You're both crazy. I don't have any sisters. I don't have any family at all. Actually, I grew up in foster care after my parents died." "What were your parents' names?" Isabelle pressed. "I don't see how that's any of your business." "Please." Isabelle's tone had shifted from angry to almost desperate. "My adoption records were sealed, but I know my birth mother's name was Margaret Alcott." The color drained completely from Claire's face. She gripped the edge of the counter as if she might fall over. "What did you just say?" she whispered. "Margaret Alcott. She was 16 when she had me. Supposedly gave me up because she couldn't take care of a baby. But if she kept one, if she kept you..." "My mother's name was Margaret Alcott," Claire said, her voice barely audible. "But she died when I was 5. Car accident. I went to live with my aunt after that." The silence in the room was deafening. Thomas felt like he was witnessing something monumental and terrible, like watching a dam break or a building collapse. "No," Isabelle said, backing away from the counter. "No, this can't be happening. This is insane." "You were adopted?" Claire asked, her voice stronger now but shaky. "When I was a baby, my adoptive parents, told me my birth mother was too young to care for me. They said I was lucky she made the responsible choice." Isabelle's laugh was bitter. "Turns out she only made the responsible choice about one of us." Claire sank into the chair behind the counter, her hands shaking. "I have a sister," she said to no one in particular. "I have a sister, and she's married to the man who—" She looked up at Thomas with something like horror. "Oh God, you knew, didn't you? Somehow you knew." "I swear to you I had no idea," Thomas said desperately. "When I heard your voice that first night, I thought you sounded like Isabelle, but I never imagined. This is impossible. Things like this don't happen in real life." "But they just did," Isabelle said quietly. She looked at Claire with a mixture of wonder and anguish. "We're sisters. Twins. Probably, from the looks of it. And you've been—" She turned to Thomas, her expression hardening. "You've been what? Living out some sick fantasy where you get the version of me that trauma hasn't broken." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Thomas felt the weight of both women's eyes on him, and for the first time in his life, he was completely speechless. "I need to get out of here," Claire said suddenly, standing up. "I can't. This is too much. I need to think." "Wait," Isabelle called out. But Claire was already heading for the back exit, leaving Thomas and Isabelle alone with the wreckage of what they'd just discovered. The private investigator's name was Marcus Chen, and he had the kind of weathered face that came from 20 years of digging up truths that people preferred to keep buried. He sat across from Isabelle and Thomas in a cramped diner booth, 3 manila folders spread between them like tarot cards promising unwelcome futures. "I have to admit," Marcus said, stirring sugar into his coffee with methodical precision, "in 2 decades of doing this work, I've never uncovered anything quite like this. It had been 3 days since the confrontation at the motel, 3 days of Isabelle obsessively researching adoption records and birth certificates, while Thomas tried unsuccessfully to reach Claire, who had apparently taken leave from work and wasn't answering her phone. The not knowing was driving them both to the edge of sanity. "Just tell us what you found," Isabelle said, her hands wrapped around her coffee mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, testament to sleepless nights spent staring at childhood photos. Looking for clues she'd missed, Marcus opened the first folder. Margaret Alcott, born 1978, died 1995 in a single-car accident on Highway 101. She was 19 when she died, which means she was 16 when she gave birth. But here's where it gets interesting. According to the hospital records I was able to access, Margaret didn't give birth to one child. She gave birth to twins. The words hit like a physical blow. Even though they'd all suspected this was coming, hearing it confirmed made it real in a way that speculation couldn't. "Twins," Isabelle repeated numbly. "Born at Mercy General Hospital on September 15, 1996. Baby A was released to Margaret Alcott. Baby B was released to Robert and Patricia Ellery through a private adoption arranged by the law firm of Morrison, Davidson and Associates." Thomas felt sick. "Baby B, that was Isabelle." "That's correct." Marcus pulled out a photocopy of an old hospital record. "The interesting thing is that there's no indication Margaret wanted to give up both children. The adoption paperwork only covers one infant. It appears she made the decision to keep one and release the other." "But why?" Isabelle's voice was barely a whisper. "How do you choose between your own children?" Marcus opened the second folder. "I did some digging into Margaret's circumstances at the time. She was 16, living in a studio apartment in East Oakland, working part-time at a grocery store. The father, based on what I could piece together from old court records, was a 22-year-old named Derek Hastings, who disappeared when he found out about the pregnancy. So she was alone," Thomas said. "Completely. No family support system that I could find. Her own parents had kicked her out when they discovered the pregnancy. She was barely surviving as it was. And then suddenly she's facing the reality of feeding and caring for 2 babies." Isabelle stared at the hospital record, her finger tracing the faded typewritten words. "So she kept Claire and gave me away." "It appears that way, yes. Although gave away might not be the right phrase. According to the social worker's notes, Margaret was approached by the Morrison firm about the adoption. Apparently, the Ellerys had been on a waiting list for years, and when word got out about the twins, they made it clear they were only interested in adopting one child. The implications of that statement settled over them like a cold fog. Thomas thought about his adoptive parents. Loving, well-meaning people who'd given Isabelle every advantage in life, but they'd only wanted one child, and their choice had fundamentally altered two lives. "What happened to Margaret after the adoption?" Isabelle asked. Marcus opened the third folder. "She struggled for 3 years raising Claire alone, worked multiple jobs, moved frequently. I found records of at least 6 different addresses. Then when Claire was 5, Margaret was driving home from her night shift job when she fell asleep at the wheel. The car went off Highway 101 near Pescadero. She died instantly. And Claire went to live with an aunt," Thomas said, remembering what Claire had told him. "Margaret's sister, Linda Alcott. But here's the thing. Linda knew about the twins. She knew Isabelle existed, but she never told Claire. According to a social worker's report I found, Linda felt it would be too confusing and painful for Claire to know she had a sister who'd been given away to rich people." Isabelle made a sound like she'd been punched. "Rich people? Is that how they saw it?" Apparently, Linda Alcott had strong feelings about class differences. She raised Claire to believe that wealthy people were fundamentally different from them, that they couldn't be trusted. It might explain why Claire was so upset when she discovered Thomas's identity. Thomas thought about Claire's reaction when she'd found the magazine. The way she'd accused him of manipulating her for entertainment. It made more sense now, though it didn't make the memory hurt any less. "Where is Claire now?" Thomas asked. "We've been trying to reach her. She's staying with a friend in Santa Cruz. A woman named Maria Rodriguez. I believe she's the neighbor who watches Claire's daughter during work hours. From what I could gather, Claire needed space to process all of this." Isabelle closed her eyes. "I can't imagine how she must be feeling. Finding out you have a sister is one thing. Finding out your sister is married to the man who's been, whatever Thomas has been to her, that's something else entirely. There's one more thing," Marcus said carefully. "I found something else in the records that might be relevant." He pulled out a business card from the third folder. Expensive cream cardstock with elegant lettering. "Franklin Ashford, estate attorney. He's been looking for both of you for years." "Looking for us? Why?" "Apparently, Mr. Ashford represented the family that employed Margaret as a housekeeper before she got pregnant. When he learned about her situation and what happened after her death, he felt responsible somehow. He's been trying to locate both twins to discuss what he calls a matter of some importance." Thomas took the card, noting the prestigious downtown address. "What kind of matter?" "He wouldn't tell me over the phone. Said it was something that needed to be discussed in person, with both sisters present." Isabelle laughed bitterly. "Both sisters. As if we're actually going to be able to have a normal sisterly relationship after all this." "Maybe you will," Marcus said gently. "I've seen stranger things work out." "Have you seen anything like this before?" Thomas asked. Marcus shook his head. "Not exactly like this, no. But I've seen enough to know that family secrets have a way of surfacing eventually, usually at the worst possible moment, and usually in the most complicated way imaginable." After Marcus left, Thomas and Isabelle sat in the diner booth, staring at the folders full of documentation that explained how their lives had become so impossibly entangled. "I need to see her," Isabelle said finally. "Claire? My sister." The word came out strange, like Isabelle was testing how it felt in her mouth. "I need to talk to her. Not about you, not about this mess we've all created, but about Margaret, about what it was like growing up with our mother." Thomas nodded, though the thought of Isabelle and Claire meeting again made his stomach clench with anxiety. "Do you want me to come with you?" "No." Isabelle's answer was immediate and firm. "This needs to be just us sisters. If we're ever going to figure out how to be family, it can't be with you in the middle of it." The logic was sound, but it stung nonetheless. Thomas realized that his presence had complicated everything from the beginning, that his selfish need for escape had tangled up 3 lives in ways that might be impossible to untangle. "What about Franklin Ashford?" he asked. Isabelle picked up the business card, studying it. "After I talk to Claire, if she's willing to see him, we'll go together. But first, I need to understand who my sister is. Not the woman you've been projecting onto, but the real person. And us." Isabelle met his eyes across the table. I honestly don't know, Thomas. 3 days ago, I thought we were getting divorced because we'd grown apart. Now I find out my husband has been having an emotional affair with my twin sister. I don't even know how to begin processing that. Thomas nodded, accepting the honesty even though it hurt. For what it's worth, I never meant for any of this to happen. I know, Isabelle said softly, but meaning something and doing something are two different things. And what you did, what we all did, has consequences we're going to have to live with. The coffee shop in Santa Cruz was the kind of place where mismatched furniture and indie music created an atmosphere of deliberate bohemian comfort. Claire sat in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a ceramic mug, staring out the rain-streaked window at tourists hurrying past under colorful umbrellas. She'd been hiding here for 3 days, staying at Maria's apartment, trying to make sense of a revelation that had turned her entire understanding of herself upside down. When Isabelle walked through the door, Claire felt that same shock of recognition she'd experienced at the motel. Seeing her sister, the word still felt foreign in her mind, was like looking into a funhouse mirror that reflected back a life she might have lived. Isabelle was polished, where Claire was natural, confident where Claire was cautious, but the bone structure, the way she moved, even the way she tilted her head when she was thinking, it was like watching herself perform a different version of her own life. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Isabelle said, sliding into the booth across from Claire. Up close, the differences were more apparent. Isabelle's skin showed the effects of expensive skincare. Her hair was professionally colored. Her clothes cost more than Claire made in a month. But underneath all that, Claire could see something fragile, almost brittle. "I wasn't sure I would," Claire admitted. "But Maria said I'd regret it if I didn't at least try to understand. Maria sounds wise. She is. She's been more of a mother to me than anyone since Margaret died." Claire studied Isabelle's face, looking for traces of their mother. "Do you remember anything about being adopted? Any fragments from before?" Isabelle shook her head. "Nothing concrete. Sometimes I have dreams about crying in a room that's too quiet, but that could be anything. My parents, my adoptive parents, were wonderful, but they never talked about my birth family. They said it would be too confusing. Margaret talked about you," Claire said quietly, and Isabelle's eyes widened. "Not often, and never directly, but sometimes, when she thought I was asleep, she'd cry and whisper about the other baby. I never understood what she meant until now. What was she like?" Claire smiled. The first genuine expression of warmth she'd shown since Isabelle arrived. Beautiful, sad, but beautiful. She had this way of making everything seem like an adventure, even when we were eating cereal for dinner because it was all we could afford. She'd tell me stories about magical places where little girls could be anything they wanted to be. Did she ever say why she kept you and not me? The question hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they should cross. Claire had been dreading it, knowing it would come but having no good answer. She told me once, when I was about 4, that she'd had to make the hardest choice any mother could make. She said she chose to keep me because I was born first, and she thought that meant I was supposed to stay with her. Claire's voice grew softer. But then she said that she spent every day wondering if she'd made the right choice, if maybe the other baby needed her more. Isabelle's eyes filled with tears. She thought about me. Every day, according to Aunt Linda. Linda said Margaret would buy 2 of everything, 2 birthday cakes, 2 Christmas presents, and put one aside for the daughter who lives with angels. I thought it was just something she made up to make me feel special, but now, 2 birthday cakes, Isabelle whispered. Jesus, I had elaborate birthday parties every year. Professional entertainers, ponies, the works, and she was somewhere buying me a cake I'd never see. They sat in silence for a moment, both processing the weight of their mother's invisible grief. "Tell me about after she died," Isabelle said finally. Claire's expression darkened. Linda wasn't Margaret. She loved me, I think, but she was angry about everything. Angry at Margaret for getting pregnant so young. Angry at the father for abandoning her. Angry at the system that forced impossible choices on a 16-year-old girl. And she was especially angry at the people who adopted you. She knew about me. She knew everything. Margaret had told her the whole story before she died, but Linda made me promise never to try to find you. She said rich people only cared about themselves. that you'd grown up thinking you were better than us, and that you'd never want anything to do with your trashy family. Isabelle flinched. That's not... I would never have thought that. I know that now. But when you're 8 years old, and the only family you have left is telling you that your sister wouldn't want you, it shapes how you see the world. Is that why you were so angry when you found out who Thomas was? Because of what Linda taught you? Claire considered the question carefully. Partly, but also because Thomas lied to me. He let me share my deepest thoughts with him while he was holding back the truth about everything. His marriage, his wealth, his reasons for being there. Linda's prejudices made me suspicious, but Thomas's deception confirmed my worst fears. What did you think his reasons were? At first I thought he was slumming. Rich guy gets his kicks playing with the working class girl. Then, when I started to have real feelings for him, I thought maybe he was different, that maybe he actually cared about me as a person. Claire's laugh was bitter. Turns out I was just a therapy tool, a way for him to remember what you used to be like before life got complicated. Isabelle leaned forward. Claire, I need you to understand something about Thomas. He's not a bad man, but he's lost. We both are. We lost a baby 2 years ago, and instead of grieving together, we grieved separately. I became angry and bitter, and he became distant and work-obsessed. By the time he found you, we were strangers living in the same house. So I was a band-aid for your marriage. Maybe. Or maybe you were a mirror that showed him what we used to have. I don't know if that makes it better or worse. Claire studied her sister's face, seeing pain there that matched her own. What's going to happen with you two? I honestly don't know. A week ago, I thought I wanted a divorce because we'd grown apart. Now I find out my husband has been emotionally involved with my twin sister, and I don't even know how to categorize that. Is it infidelity? Is it therapy? Is it just the universe's idea of a really sick joke? Despite everything, Claire found herself almost smiling. Probably all three. The thing is, Isabelle continued, talking to you now, hearing about Margaret, about how we grew up so differently, I'm starting to understand why Thomas was drawn to you. You have something I lost somewhere along the way. What's that? Hope, resilience, the ability to believe that things can get better. Isabelle's voice grew wistful. I used to be like that, before everything went wrong. Maybe that's what Thomas saw in you. Not a replacement for me, but a reminder of who I used to be. And who do you want to be now? I don't know yet, but I know I want to find out who my sister is. If you'll let me. Claire felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of tension she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. I'd like that too, but I need you to understand. I can't be around Thomas right now, maybe not ever. What happened between us? Regardless of the circumstances, it's too complicated. I understand, and honestly, I think some space from all of us might be good for him too. He needs to figure out who he is when he's not trying to fix or replace or recapture something. There's something else, Claire said, pulling out Franklin Ashford's business card. The investigator gave this to Thomas. Apparently, there's someone who's been looking for both of us. Isabelle took the card, studying it. A state attorney. That's either very good news or very bad news. Are you willing to find out which? Only if we go together? Whatever this is about, whatever Margaret might have left behind, or whatever secrets are still buried, I don't want to face it alone. Together then, Claire agreed. Sisters. The word felt different now, less foreign, not natural yet, but possible, like something they might grow into if they were both brave enough to try. Outside, the rain had stopped, and weak sunlight was beginning to break through the clouds. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Franklin Ashford's law office occupied the top floor of a Victorian building in downtown San Francisco. All mahogany panels and leather-bound books that spoke of old money and older secrets. The attorney himself was in his 70s, with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses that had probably been fashionable sometime in the 1980s. I've been looking for you both for nearly 15 years, he said, gesturing for Claire and Isabelle to sit in the burgundy leather chairs facing his massive desk. When I finally received word that you'd been found, and found each other, I hardly knew whether to celebrate or apologize. Claire shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The office felt like another world entirely from her usual environment, and she was hyper-aware of her Target jeans and thrift store sweater in a space where everything probably cost more than her monthly rent. "Mr. Chen said you knew our mother," Isabelle said, her voice carefully controlled. She'd insisted on taking the lead in this meeting, and Claire was grateful to let her sister handle the formalities. "I did indeed. Margaret worked for the Pemberton family for about 6 months before she became pregnant. Lovely girl, intelligent, hardworking, dreams of going to college someday." Franklin's expression grew sad. When the family discovered her condition, they dismissed her immediately. No references, no severance pay. It was 1996, and while such treatment was legally questionable even then, Margaret was young and scared and didn't know her rights. "You represented the family?" Claire asked, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived. "I did, though I'm not proud of it. The Pembertons were an old client, and I was younger then, more concerned with billable hours than with doing what was right." Franklin opened a manila folder on his desk. "When I learned years later what had happened to Margaret, her death, her children being separated, I felt complicit in a tragedy that might have been prevented." "What do you mean?" Isabelle leaned forward. "If the Pembertons had provided proper support when they dismissed Margaret, if they'd given her the references she deserved, she might have found better employment. She might not have been forced to choose between her daughters. She might not have been working 3 jobs just to survive." Claire felt a familiar anger rising in her chest. "So you want to ease your guilty conscience by throwing some money at us now?" Franklin smiled sadly. "I deserved that, but it's not quite so simple." He pulled a thick document from the folder. "About 10 years ago, Richard Pemberton, the family patriarch, died. His son Michael inherited the estate, and one of his first acts was to ask me to locate Margaret and make amends for his father's treatment of her." "Make amends how?" Isabelle asked. "Richard Pemberton was worth approximately $12 million when he died. Michael set aside $1 million in a trust fund, specifically designated for Margaret Alcott and her children. When we learned of Margaret's death, the fund was restructured to benefit her daughters, both of them." The silence in the room was profound. Claire felt like the floor had just shifted underneath her, and from Isabelle's expression, she was experiencing something similar. $500,000 each. Claire's voice was barely a whisper, plus accumulated interest over the past 10 years. The current value of each inheritance is approximately $675,000. Claire stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the bustling street below. $500,000. More money than she'd see in a lifetime of working at the motel. Money that could pay for Sophie's college education, that could buy them a house, that could provide the kind of security she'd never dared to dream about. "There are conditions," Franklin continued gently. "The money must be used for education, housing, or starting a business. It cannot be accessed all at once. It's structured as a trust with annual distributions over 20 years. So we can't blow it all on cars and vacations," Isabelle said with a bitter laugh. "Smart. Michael Pemberton wanted to ensure the money would truly change your lives for the better, not just provide temporary relief." Claire turned back from the window. "Why now? Why not when we were children and actually needed it?" "Because I couldn't find you," Franklin said simply. "Margaret's death scattered the family. Claire went to live with her aunt, who moved frequently and kept a low profile. Isabelle was adopted, and the records were sealed. It wasn't until Thomas Ellery's situation brought you both to public attention that we were able to piece together where you were." "Thomas?" Claire said, the name leaving a bitter taste. "Of course this all comes back to him somehow." "Actually," Franklin said carefully, "Mr. Ellery has no claim to any of this money. The trust is specifically for Margaret Alcott's daughters, period. But I understand there are complications in your relationships with him." Isabelle and Claire exchanged glances. In the week since their coffee shop meeting, they'd begun talking regularly. Tentative conversations about their childhoods, their memories of Margaret, their hopes for the future. But Thomas remained a subject they carefully avoided. "What kind of complications?" Isabelle asked. Franklin removed his glasses and cleaned them with deliberate care. "I took the liberty of researching the situation after Mr. Chen provided me with the basic facts. A man falls in love with his wife, loses her to grief and distance, then becomes obsessed with a woman who reminds him of who his wife used to be, only to discover that woman is his wife's twin sister. It reads like something from a Victorian novel. It feels like something from a nightmare," Claire said flatly. "Perhaps. but it also presents an opportunity for healing, if you're all brave enough to take it. What do you mean? Isabelle asked. Franklin leaned back in his chair. I've been practicing family law for 45 years. I've seen every possible configuration of love, loss, betrayal, and reconciliation. What I've learned is that the families who survive trauma are the ones who face it together, honestly, with professional help. You're suggesting therapy, Claire said. I'm suggesting that you three are bound together now, whether you like it or not. You can spend the rest of your lives running from that connection, or you can figure out how to transform it into something healthy. Even if that were possible, Claire said. I'm not sure I want to. Thomas lied to me. He used me to work through his feelings about his marriage. I don't owe him forgiveness just because we're all connected by some cosmic joke. You don't owe him anything, Franklin agreed. But you might owe yourself the chance to heal from this experience instead of carrying it as a wound for the rest of your life. Isabelle was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful. There's a family therapist that my grief counselor recommended, Dr. Nathaniel Mercer. He specializes in complex family dynamics and trauma resolution. Claire looked at her sister with surprise. You've been thinking about this? I've been thinking about a lot of things. About Margaret. About the choices she was forced to make. About how trauma gets passed down through generations unless someone decides to break the cycle. Isabelle met Claire's eyes. Sophie deserves better than to grow up with a mother who's carrying unprocessed anger and trust issues. The mention of her daughter hit home in a way that abstract concepts about healing couldn't. Claire thought about Sophie's questions over the past week. Why Mommy seemed sad. Why they were staying at Maria's apartment. Whether they were going to move again. If I agreed to try therapy, Claire said slowly, it would be for Sophie. Not for Thomas. Not for you. And definitely not because I think we're destined to be some kind of happy family. That's a perfectly valid reason, Franklin said. The best healing often happens when we do it for someone we love more than ourselves. And the money, Isabelle asked. What happens to the trust if we don't want it? It remains in trust indefinitely, but I hope you'll both consider accepting it. Margaret made impossible choices because she didn't have resources. You don't have to make those same choices. You can use this money to build the kind of lives she dreamed of for you. Claire thought about Margaret, about the woman who'd bought 2 birthday cakes and whispered about the other baby in the dark, about the choices that poverty had forced on a 16-year-old girl, and the ripple effects that had shaped 2 lives in completely different directions. I'll think about it, she said finally. The therapy and the money. But I need time. Of course. Franklin handed them each a business card. Dr. Mercer's information is on the back. When you're ready. If you're ready. He's expecting to hear from you. As they left the office, stepping back out into the San Francisco afternoon, Claire felt like she was carrying the weight of possibilities she'd never imagined. Money, family, healing, concepts that had seemed impossibly distant just a few weeks ago. Thank you, Isabelle said as they reached the street, for coming with me today, for being willing to consider this. Thank you for finding me, Claire replied, and was surprised to realize she meant it. 2 years later, Dr. Nathaniel Mercer's office had become as familiar as home to all 3 of them over the past 24 months. The soft gray walls, the strategically placed boxes of tissues, the comfortable chairs arranged in a circle rather than the traditional therapist-patient setup. It had all witnessed the slow, painful, sometimes beautiful process of 3 broken people learning how to be whole again. Thomas sat in his usual chair, watching Claire laugh at something Isabelle had just said about Sophie's latest school project. The sound still caught him off guard sometimes, not because it reminded him of his wife, but because it was uniquely Claire's. Over 2 years of therapy, he'd learned to see her as herself, rather than as a reflection of someone else. How are you feeling about the ceremony next week? Dr. Mercer asked, his gentle voice drawing Thomas back to the present. Nervous, Isabelle admitted, unconsciously twisting the wedding ring she'd never stopped wearing. It feels strange, renewing our vows after everything we've been through. Strange how? Dr. Mercer probed. Like we're different people than we were when we first got married. Which I guess we are. Isabelle glanced at Thomas, her expression soft with an affection that had been rebuilt slowly, deliberately, over months of honest conversation and hard work. We're not trying to go back to who we were. We're choosing to move forward as who we've become. Thomas nodded. The first time we got married, we thought love meant never having to work at it. We believed that if we were meant to be together, it would always be easy. Losing the baby shattered that illusion. And instead of grieving together, we each retreated into our own private hell. And now, Dr. Mercer asked, now we know that love is a choice you make every day, especially when it's hard. Thomas said, we know that grief shared is grief halved, and joy shared is joy doubled. We know that marriage isn't about finding someone who completes you. It's about two complete people choosing to build something together. Claire smiled at that, and Thomas felt the familiar warmth of her approval. Their relationship had transformed over the past 2 years into something he'd never expected. Genuine friendship, not the ersatz connection based on projection and need that had brought them together, but real affection built on mutual respect and understanding. Claire, how are you feeling about attending the ceremony? Dr. Mercer turned his attention to her. Honored, she said simply. A year ago, I couldn't have imagined being in the same room as Thomas without feeling angry or manipulated. Now I'm genuinely happy for both of them. It was true. The woman sitting across from him bore little resemblance to the defensive, wounded person he'd first met at the Harbor Lights Motel. Claire had used her inheritance to go back to school. Earning a degree in social work while raising Sophie, she'd bought a small house near the coast, close enough to Isabelle that the sisters could see each other regularly, but far enough away to maintain their independence. More importantly, she'd learned to trust again. Thomas could see it in the way she carried herself now, with confidence instead of guardedness, with openness instead of suspicion. Tell me about Sophie's reaction to having an extended family, Dr. Mercer said. Claire's face lit up. She's thriving. Having Isabelle as an aunt has been incredible for her. Someone who can spoil her and teach her about her grandmother without the weight of daily parenting decisions. And she's adjusted well to your relationship with Dr. Martinez, Dr. Mercer asked, with just a hint of a smile. Claire blushed slightly. She adores him. She told me last week that she hopes we get married soon because she wants to call him Dad officially instead of just Diego who makes Mom smile. Thomas felt nothing but happiness at Claire's obvious joy. Dr. Diego Martinez was a pediatric psychiatrist she'd met during her social work internship. A kind, intelligent man who treated both Claire and Sophie with the respect and care they deserved. Their relationship had developed slowly, built on friendship and shared values rather than the intense, complicated emotions that had characterized Thomas's connection with Claire. And how do you feel about Sophie wanting a father figure? Dr. Mercer asked. Grateful, Claire said. I spent so many years afraid to trust anyone with our hearts, afraid that anyone I led into our lives would eventually leave or hurt us. Learning to distinguish between healthy caution and trauma-based fear has been one of the hardest parts of this process, but also one of the most important, Isabelle added, for all of us. Thomas thought about his own journey over the past 2 years. He'd had to confront some uncomfortable truths about himself. His tendency to avoid difficult emotions by throwing himself into work, his habit of idealizing people instead of seeing them clearly, his failure to support Isabelle properly through their grief. Thomas, you've been quiet today, Dr. Mercer observed. What's on your mind? I've been thinking about forgiveness, Thomas said slowly. Not just receiving it, but understanding what it actually means. Tell me more about that. For a long time, I thought forgiveness meant that Claire and Isabelle should just get over what I'd done, move past it, and return to normal. But there is no normal after something like this. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting or pretending something didn't happen. It's about choosing not to let the hurt define your future. And have you forgiven yourself? Dr. Mercer asked. Thomas considered the question carefully. I'm learning to. I think self-forgiveness might be the hardest kind, because you can't escape your own judgment. But holding on to guilt doesn't serve anyone. It doesn't help Isabelle heal from our marriage problems, and it doesn't honor the growth Claire has achieved. Speaking of growth, Dr. Mercer said, Claire, you mentioned you have some news to share. Claire's smile was radiant. I got accepted into the graduate program at UC Santa Barbara. I start my master's in family therapy in the fall. That's wonderful, Thomas said, and meant it completely, following in Dr. Mercer's footsteps. Inspired by him definitely, but also by our experience here. I want to help other families navigate complex trauma, especially families dealing with adoption, separation, and reunion issues. The program has a specialty track in exactly that, Dr. Mercer said with obvious pride. I think you'll be an excellent therapist. Claire, you have the most important qualification: lived experience combined with the wisdom to process it. What about the trust fund money? Isabelle asked. Are you comfortable using it for school? Claire nodded. I am. I think Margaret would be proud to know that her daughters both got the education she never had the chance to pursue. You with your architecture degree, me with therapy. We're both building things. You create physical spaces where people can live safely, and I want to create emotional spaces where families can heal. That's beautiful, Isabelle said, reaching over to squeeze her sister's hand. I love that we found different but complementary ways to honor her memory. Dr. Mercer checked his watch. We're getting close to time. Before we wrap up, I want to check in about next week. You'll all be seeing each other in a social context for the first time since the vow renewal. How are we feeling about that? Ready, Isabelle said firmly. I want my sister there when Thomas and I make new promises to each other. Not because I need her approval, but because she's family now. Chosen family. Grateful, Claire added. A year ago, the idea of having family felt impossible. Now I have a sister, a daughter who's thriving, a career I'm passionate about, and a man who loves us both exactly as we are. Humble, Thomas said finally. Humble and grateful that two extraordinary women chose to forgive me and show me what real strength looks like. As they left Dr. Mercer's office that day, Thomas realized that this was what healing looked like. Not a return to some imagined perfect past, but a deliberate choice to build something better from the pieces that remained. The garden behind Thomas and Isabelle's home had been transformed into something magical. White roses climbed trellises that framed the small altar, while string lights created a canopy of stars against the early evening sky. It was intimate. Just 20 people who had witnessed their journey through darkness and back into light. Claire stood at the edge of the gathering, watching her sister adjust Thomas's boutonniere with the careful attention of someone who had learned that love lived in small gestures as much as grand declarations. Sophie bounced beside her in a pale blue dress, excited to be the flower girl for her Aunt Isabelle's second wedding, as she'd taken to calling it. She looks beautiful, Diego said softly, slipping his arm around Claire's waist. Even after 8 months together, his presence still surprised her sometimes, not because she doubted his feelings, but because she was still learning to trust that good things could stay. They both do, Claire replied, watching Thomas's face as he looked at his wife. There was a peace there that hadn't existed 2 years ago, a settled contentment that came from choosing love with full knowledge of its cost. Dr. Mercer approached them, looking distinguished in his dark suit. Over the months of family therapy, he'd become more than just their therapist. He was a trusted friend who'd helped them navigate the impossible and emerge as something resembling a functional family. How are you feeling? He asked Claire. Grateful, she said, and realized it was becoming her default answer to that question. 2 years ago, I thought family was something that happened to other people. Now look at us. The ceremony began as the sun started its descent toward the horizon, painting everything in golden light. Thomas and Isabelle had written their own vows this time, words that acknowledged the journey they'd taken to get here. I promise to see you clearly, Thomas said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. Not as who I wish you were or who you used to be, but as who you are in this moment and who you're becoming. I promise to grieve with you when grief comes, and to celebrate with you when joy arrives. I promise to choose you, even when choosing you is hard. Isabelle's vows were equally honest. I promise to trust you with my darkness as well as my light. I promise to speak my truth instead of expecting you to guess it. I promise to love you as you are, not as the man I'm trying to fix or change. I promise to be your partner, not your project. Claire found herself crying, not from sadness or regret, but from the recognition of how far they'd all come. These weren't the naive promises of young people who believed love would be easy. These were the hard-won commitments of adults who'd learned that real love required courage, honesty, and work. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, again, the kiss they shared was different from their first wedding kiss 20 years ago. It carried the weight of everything they'd survived, and the hope of everything they'd learned. The reception was held on the same patio where, 3 years earlier, Isabelle had thrown a wine glass at the wall and asked for a divorce. Now it was filled with laughter, with Sophie teaching the other children an elaborate dance she'd invented, with Franklin Ashford regaling anyone who would listen with stories about Margaret that painted her as the spirited young woman she'd been before life became so complicated. "Can I steal the bride for a moment?" Claire asked, approaching Isabelle during a lull in the celebration. They walked to the edge of the garden, where they could see the ocean in the distance, its surface reflecting the last rays of sunlight. "I have something for you," Claire said, pulling out a small wrapped package. Inside was a digital recorder, sleek and modern, nothing like the basic device Claire had used for her therapy recordings at the motel. "I thought maybe we could start a new tradition," Claire explained, recording messages for each other. "For Sophie, for the family we're building. Happy memories instead of therapeutic processing." Isabelle smiled, turning the device over in her hands. "You know what the first recording should be." "What?" "Both of us, together, talking to Margaret, telling her how we turned out, how we found each other, how we're okay." Claire felt her throat tighten with emotion. "She would have loved that. She would have loved you," Isabelle said softly. "The woman you've become, the mother you are to Sophie, the strength you found even when everything seemed impossible." They stood together in comfortable silence, two women who shared a face and a history, but had found completely different paths to the same destination. "Wholeness?" "Claire," Sophie's voice called from across the patio. "Diego says it's time for cake." As they walked back toward the celebration, Claire caught sight of Thomas watching them with an expression of deep contentment. When he saw her looking, he raised his glass in a small salute. Not romantic, not yearning, but genuinely celebratory. The cake was a 3-layer creation that Sophie had helped design, complete with decorative flowers that she'd insisted should be the exact color of hope. As Thomas and Isabelle fed each other the first bite, playfully, but without the aggressive cake smashing that had marked their first wedding, Claire realized that this was what healing looked like in practice. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of joy, despite everything they'd endured. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Claire found herself alone with Dr. Mercer on the patio. "I have news," she said, unable to contain her excitement any longer. "More news? You're already starting graduate school, planning a life with Diego, raising an incredible daughter," Diego proposed. The words came out in a rush, followed by laughter that bubbled up from somewhere deep in her chest. "This morning, actually, Sophie helped him plan the whole thing. They made me breakfast in bed and presented the ring on a plate decorated with flowers from our garden." Dr. Mercer's face broke into a wide grin. "That's wonderful, Claire. How do you feel?" "Terrified and thrilled and grateful and about 12 other emotions I don't have names for yet." She looked down at the simple band on her finger. Nothing like the elaborate diamond Isabelle wore, but perfect for the life she was building. "I keep waiting for something to go wrong, for the other shoe to drop." "That's understandable, given everything you've been through. But maybe the other shoe already dropped and you survived it. Maybe what's happening now is what comes after, the life you get to build when you've done the work to heal," as if summoned by their conversation. Diego appeared with Sophie, who was half asleep against his shoulder. "Ready to go home?" he asked Claire, and the word home still sent a little thrill through her heart. "Almost." Claire pulled out the recorder Isabelle had given her, switching it on. "I want to capture this moment, the feeling of standing here, surrounded by family I didn't even know existed 3 years ago, about to marry a man who loves both me and my daughter exactly as we are." She looked around the patio, taking in the sight of Thomas and Isabelle dancing slowly to music only they could hear, of Franklin Ashford helping to clean up with the efficiency of someone who'd learned that privilege meant responsibility, of Dr. Mercer gathering the scattered flowers that Sophie had thrown with more enthusiasm than accuracy. 3 years ago, I was a broken woman hiding in a roadside motel, recording my thoughts because I was too afraid to say them out loud to another human being, she said into the device. Tonight, I'm surrounded by voices I trust, voices that have taught me that healing is possible, and that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love each other through the mess and the beauty of being human. She clicked off the recorder and smiled at Diego. who was watching her with the patient affection that had characterized their entire relationship. "Now I'm ready to go home," she said, as they drove away from the celebration. Sophie asleep in the back seat, and Diego's hand warm in hers. Claire thought about voices, how they could wound and heal, how they could carry hope across impossible distances, how they could harmonize even when they came from broken places. In the distance, she could still hear the faint sound of laughter from the garden, where two people who'd learned to love each other twice were beginning their second chance at forever.